Hey everyone! Today we're going to dive into a really fascinating economic idea, one that's designed to fight inequality, not just by putting a band-aid on it, but by getting right to the root of the problem. So, let's jump in.
All right, let's kick things off with a huge question, one that really sits at the core of everything we're talking about today. Is poverty just inevitable? Is it because there's simply not enough stuff, resources to go around for everybody? Or is there something else going on? Because how you answer that question, well, it leads you down two totally different paths for how you'd even try to build a fair society.
Okay, so to really get that alternative view, we need to dig into the basic ideas behind the Islamic economic vision. And it all starts with looking at the problem in a completely different way.
And this right here lays it out perfectly. You've got classical economics on one side, which usually starts with this idea of scarcity, right? The thinking is we all want endless things, but there's a limited amount of resources. So naturally, some people are going to end up poor. But the Islamic framework, it flips that on its head. It starts from the assumption that, hey, there's actually enough stuff for everyone's basic needs. The real problem, it says, isn't scarcity. It's waste, it's injustice, and it's the fact that wealth is just completely maldistributed.
This quote, wow, it just cuts right to the heart of that idea. It basically frames poverty not as some random accident, but as a direct result of how wealth gets piled up and spent. It's a powerful way of saying that one person's extreme luxury might actually be connected to another person not having enough to eat.
Okay, so if that's the diagnosis, what's the cure? Well, one of the main tools here is something called zakat. And it's really, really important to get this. This is not just charity you can choose to give. It's an obligatory tax on wealth. Think of it as a built-in systemic way to redistribute wealth. It's even framed as a right that the poor have, a claim on the wealth of the rich. It's a fundamental pillar of the whole system.
Now, zakat doesn't stand alone. It's part of this bigger three-part approach. First, you have the foundation, the ethical values of justice, equality, and honesty. Then, second, you have the actual economic tools. That includes the mandatory zakat, but also voluntary charity, which is called sadaqah, and public endowments, known as waqf. And then the third piece, and this one is absolutely critical, you need the government, you need institutions to actually make sure these rules are followed and the whole thing actually works.
So that's the ideal, right? The vision. But how does it stack up against what's actually happening on the ground? Let's shift gears and look at the real-world social welfare systems that have developed, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa, or the MENA region.
So after the colonial period, this sort of unwritten deal, a social contract, started to take shape. The trade-off was basically this. Citizens would give up some political freedoms, and in return, the state promised to take care of them economically. Now, how did they pay for this? Well, in some places, it was massive oil money. In others, it was by racking up a lot of debt. This created a system where the state acts like a provider, handing out economic benefits to keep everyone on board, politically speaking.
And one of the biggest policies to come out of this deal was universal subsidies. I mean, on the surface, it sounds like a fantastic idea, right? Make things like fuel and food cheaper for everyone. What could be wrong with that? Well, as it turns out, the reality is a lot more complicated.
And that brings us to what's called the regressive trap. A policy is regressive if it ends up helping the rich way more than it helps the poor. Think about it. If you subsidize fuel for everyone, who gets the biggest benefit? It's the wealthy family with 3 cars and a huge house that uses tons of electricity. They consume way more, so they get a much bigger chunk of that government money than the poor family that barely uses any.
And if you want to understand just how massive this can get, just look at this number from Iran. At one point, their fuel subsidy program was costing them the equivalent of 15.5% of their entire GDP. I mean, that is a staggering amount of money. It was more than they were spending on health and education put together. Just let that sink in.
So where did all that money go? This chart tells the story. It shows you what they call the leakage rate. A whopping 94% of the benefit from that huge subsidy program went to people who were not poor. Only 6%, a tiny little sliver, actually made it to the low-income families it was supposed to be helping in the first place.
And this isn't just about subsidies. This same pattern, where things don't end up being very fair, shows up in other really important areas, like healthcare and jobs. And it all leads to this concept called poverty of opportunity.
Poverty of opportunity. This is such a key idea, because it says poverty isn't just about not having enough money in your pocket. It's about being shut out from the things you need to even have a chance at a better life. We're talking about access to good schools, decent healthcare, and a fair shot at a job. It's about being pushed to the margins of society. Let's take education as an example. Look at this data from Egypt. The government spends a lot to subsidize university education.
Great, right? But who actually gets that benefit? The numbers are pretty stark. The richest third of families get over half, 54% of that money. The poorest third, they get just 10%. So once again, you see public money flowing uphill to the people who need it the least.
And you see a similar kind of weirdness in the job market. In a lot of the big oil-rich countries, the government basically became the main employer for everyone. I mean, look at this. Public sector jobs can make up around 80% of all employment. Compare that to about 13% in your average high-income country. And these government jobs, they often go to the folks who are already educated and have connections. So it ends up being another form of subsidy that helps the better off and kind of suffocates the growth of a real private sector economy.
So, okay, we've seen how these systems can be super inefficient, wasteful, and frankly, just not very fair. That leaves us with the big question. What do you do about it? What's the way forward? How do you get back to those original ideas of economic justice? Well, one of the main ideas out there is a total shift in strategy. The thinking is, instead of making things cheaper for everyone, why not just give money directly to the people who actually need it the most? Simple, direct, targeted cash transfers.
And there's a really successful model for this called the conditional cash transfer, or CCT. It's worked really well in places like Brazil and Mexico. The idea is brilliant in its simplicity. Step 1, you give cash directly to poor families. But, and here's the conditional part, step 2, you tie that money to certain things, like making sure their kids are going to school and getting their health checkups. So you're not just helping them today, you're investing in the next generation and helping to break that cycle of poverty for good.
But of course, cash transfers, as great as they are, aren't a silver bullet. They're just one part of a way bigger picture. To build a system that's truly fair and built to last, you need a lot more. You'd need things like oil funds to save that resource wealth for future generations. You'd need a fair, progressive tax system. You'd have to pour investment into quality education. And maybe most importantly, you'd need to reform government institutions to get people to trust them again.
And that really brings us back to where we started. We began with this incredible vision, one based on these timeless principles of justice and making sure everyone has what they need. And then we saw the modern reality, with all of its flaws and unintended consequences. So it leaves you with a really big question, doesn't it? Can you take those old, timeless principles and combine them with smart, modern, data-driven policies to actually fix the massive economic inequality we see today? It's definitely something we're thinking about.